Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. And thank you to the Seattle Downtown Association for inviting me to come speak today. It's been just over a year since we first felt the effects of the pandemic. And as we all know, Seattle was one of the first and hardest hit cities in the US to experience the impacts of COVID-19. As a company with deep roots and a large presence in Seattle, we took action at the start of the pandemic to begin providing relief where we could. We created the Neighborhood Small Business Relief Fund, which helped disperse more than $11 million in cash grants and free rent to more than 900 small businesses in the community. We donated nearly 9,000 laptops to Seattle public school students who needed assistance and devices in transitioning to remote learning. We're continuing to leverage our logistical experience and expertise and donating services through the community, delivering programs to provide meals to approximately 2,500 Seattle public school students per week who are no longer receiving in-person, free, and reduced priced meals due to COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020, Amazon delivered more than 650,000 meals to thousands of Seattle public school students, and we're continuing to deliver meals in 2021. This month, we mark the 1-year anniversary of welcoming families into the newest Mary's Place shelter. The new building in the heart of Amazon's Seattle neighborhood has helped more than 85 families find housing amid the pandemic, providing a safe shelter for those who need it most. Most recently, we worked with Virginia Mason Franciscan Health and have held 8 vaccination clinics on site at our Seattle Meeting Center. I'm happy to share that these 8 clinics have delivered more than 20,000 COVID-19 vaccine doses to date, and we'll keep the doors open and continue immunizing until this is no longer needed in our community. And while the end is nearly in sight, it is of no doubt that the impact of COVID-19 will be felt for some time. We're proud of the work that we've done and are continuing to support our Seattle neighbors and the community. We'll work and continue to partner with local leaders in an effort to support the city and coming back even stronger than we were before. While we've all come together to meet the moment, I'm looking forward to learning more today about our collective path forward. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this morning's program, historian, producer, and radio host, Felix Vanel.
Thanks, John, and thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks Downtown Seattle Association for putting together this series. You take a snapshot of Seattle in March 2021, and it's a very different city than it was a year ago. But the core aspects, the good things and the challenging things are still the same. I think a lot of us read Mike Baker's New York Times piece last week about all the things that Seattle and King County got right in terms of a public health response. And then a lot of people, I know I found that very reassuring and felt sort of patted myself on the back, though I had nothing to do with it. I felt good about that, about what we'd done as a city and a region. And the dashboards are encouraging as well. If you look at even just the vaccination rates in King County, something like 28% of King County residents have received at least 1 vaccination dose and 15% have received both doses. And the other factors, the case numbers, positivity rates, all the signs are good. But if you set aside the dashboards and all the numbers and the figures, which are very important, I feel like there's this palpable sense of opportunity, things you can't really measure, but there's obviously pent up demand, and there's that can-do Seattle spirit that goes back more than 170 years of overcoming adversity, taking something awful and finding the good in it and helping reinvent the city, the next version of the city that emerges from a challenging time. So that's what I feel when I spend time in downtown Seattle, when I think about the previous year and the time ahead. And so the Downtown Revitalization Working Group that we're going to talk about today, it fits perfectly into that sense of opportunity, that sense of the city that's always been a work in progress. It feels like we have new opportunities to tackle some challenges that have been not exactly intractable, but that have stymied efforts in the past. Now is the time to put some really cool things together and just serve that pent up demand and get the old Seattle that we know and love so much running at full speed again as soon as possible. So we have a fabulous panel. We have Pamela Banks, who's the Director of Recovery and Equitable Investments for the Downtown Revitalization Working Group co-chair. She was appointed last December by Mayor Durkin as the city's Director of Recovery and Equitable Investments. Before that, she was President and CEO of the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. She's also held several positions with the City of Seattle and was named Interim Director of Seattle's Office of Economic Development in February. We also have Councilmember Andrew Lewis, who's a fifth-generation Washingtonian. He's a first-time Seattle City Council member and former Seattle City Attorney. He represents downtown Seattle, Queen Anne, and Magnolia on the council. He chairs the council's Select Committee on Homelessness Strategies and Investments. Earlier this year, he introduced the It Takes a Village initiative to scale up the number of tiny house villages in Seattle and provide a more immediate pathway to stability. And we're also joined by John Scholes, who's the DSA President and CEO, who directs the overall strategy for DSA and the operations of the Metropolitan Improvement District. For that, he was Vice President of Advocacy and Economic Development for DSA, and he spent 17 years working in nonprofit advocacy, local government, and in senior positions on political campaigns at the regional and state levels. So there's lots of directions we could go with this conversation today. It's a huge topic, but we have a great focus in the work that the working group has been focused on and what their plans are for the next few months ahead and how people can get involved and contribute to coming up with some really good solutions and doing what I think only Seattle can do in these challenging times, new and innovative and exciting ways that will make other people around the country sort of look twice and see why do they always seem to get these things right in Seattle. So Pamela, do you want to talk a little bit about the formation of the working group, or John, who wants to start off talking about the core aspects of what we're looking at today?
Take it away, Pamela. I think you're muted there, Pamela.
She was gonna, okay.
So many people have said that a million times this year.
I know, about 20 over here. Thank you for the introduction, Felix. And I do want to thank DSA for having me here today. And then a big shout out to John Scholes for stepping up to co-chair the Revitalization Working Group with me. It is a work in progress, and we're really, really excited about the opportunities that lay ahead. As you're aware, the coronavirus, coupled with the most significant economic downturn we've ever had, well, they say since the Great Depression, but in my lifetime, with the ongoing climate crisis and this racial and social justice reckoning, has required us to think about new ways and innovative ways to address the needs of our residents and the impacts of the businesses, both large and small, in downtown. And nowhere is it more clear that our downtown area needs to have a heavy emphasis and focus on equitable recovery, reopening, and revitalization due to the pandemic. To that end, the mayor, like you said, Felix, hired me to be the Director of Recovery and Equitable Investments in December. And one of the things that we have done since then is we have formed this external working group of stakeholders, residents, and representatives from the business world and cultural and community and service organization that reflect the diversity of downtown and throughout the downtown corridor. And this group is going to continue to work on long and short-term public and private strategies to bring downtown back to life. So I have a slideshow. I don't know if we want to show it now or do we want to go into the speaker part of it? So I do have a slide presentation that I was going to do really quickly to give people a better understanding of what the goals in terms of the working group consist of. So we'll go from there. So this is our vision for an equitable recovery. We definitely want to bring Seattle back as a vibrant, innovative, and diverse city with an inclusive economy that ensures all Seattleites can thrive and share in these new opportunities for the future. Our equitable recovery efforts aim to build a thriving city as a whole while also implementing intentional strategies that meet the varying needs of the neighborhood and communities. And I also want to read a statement around race and social justice to this end. You know, the equitable recovery must benefit Black, Indigenous, and disenfranchised communities, as equity requires those with power and privilege to share that power and privilege. This working group is going to promote racial equity when planning recovery strategies and identifying long and short-term strategies to promote equitable and inclusive economic recovery and invest resources in the BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The working group is also going to align city initiatives to build community resilience, invest in BIPOC communities, and ensure access to opportunity among historically disenfranchised communities. So this working group is working from a framework of equitable recovery, as you can see in the large circle. And we also have two different strategies around community resilience and economics. Our timeframes are broad, and there are three of them. And this is all dependent on vaccinations, wide-scale vaccinations. We have immediate strategies that we're going to do that we can implement prior to having long-term vaccinations. We want to restore interest in our neighborhoods and our business communities with a heavy emphasis on downtown Seattle. Our near-term strategies we can roll out and achieve once we've achieved this widespread vaccination. The mayor has set a goal of 70% of all adults being vaccinated, and that will and when that happens, then we will start creating and coordinating our activities, and we're going to return to what we call the new normal. Long-term strategies, these are multi-year strategies. The $100 million community investment fund that the mayor and city council so graciously has put in the budget to do this work is going to have long-lasting impacts on communities, and it's going to really show the nature or the change of the office workforce in the long-term strategy. I'm looking at, and we're praying to, and I'm saying this to Councilmember Lewis while you're here, we would love to see a 10-year, $100 million fund for the next 10 years, because we know it's going to take a good 3 to 5 years for Seattle to even get close to recovery and to get close to back to where we were prior to the pandemic as far as resources and tax base. Next, again, our standpoint on working is talking about community resilience. The equitable recovery efforts will ensure that the city and our partners are investing in our communities, that all Seattleites have access to opportunity. John so graciously talked about some of the things that Amazon has done to help us, help the city and help children and education in the Seattle area. So we want to ensure that everyone has access to opportunity in order to benefit from this new normal that we're going into. Community investments is the $100 million fund and other partners that we will gather to get funding for, to create opportunities to move our communities forward. Next slide. The economic recovery is the efforts of the government, the community, and the businesses, that basically our group and philanthropy and nonprofits working together so that we can revitalize our economic engine, what I call the heartbeat of the city, and that is the downtown core. We're going to get very creative around industries and culture and retail. So we know we have to support business and industry moving forward while meeting the basic needs of our neighborhood. So it's not that we're just focusing on downtown. We have this heavy emphasis on downtown, but we're also at the same time going to be doing work out into the neighborhoods and in the small business community areas. So our working group that we compose it's growing. It's about 35 people now, John. We keep getting added ads, but they're much needed ads, and they've agreed to meet bi-weekly. And we just finished our third meeting this week. We're going to meet bi-weekly for the next 4 to 5 months, and then go to monthly meetings in September. The goal of the group is to improve safety, definitely to improve safety and create a sense of safeness when people are downtown, creating a room for innovation and creativity in the arts, culture, and retail, and then ensuring that key infrastructure projects move forward. That's from completing the beautiful waterfront all the way up to the convention center to Climate Pledge Arena. Those three areas are just crucial in revitalizing our downtown core and keeping people employed as well. And then we want to bring our workers and patrons back safely. And we know that, again, the new normal is going to look different. There's going to be a large amount of office space, retail, commercial space, ground floor that is going to sit empty as businesses and city and county figure out how we bring our employees back to work in downtown and achieve all those 4 goals that you see on the screen right here. Next slide. We have, like I said, we could consider downtown a wide swath from the Seattle Center to South Lake Union, all the way to the stadium districts that I can see out my window, Pioneer Square, Chinatown, and from the waterfront to the convention center. What our goal is to have some activation in each of these neighborhoods sometime before fall hits. So spring and summer is getting ready. Activation includes programming, like DSA so graciously did with the Westlake, covering Westlake and creating a space for people to rest and watch some games, and hopefully one day have a beer when we get the liquor license. We also want to create this sense of public safety, and then we're going to address the empty commercial office space that's going to be available moving forward. Those are some of our tasks. Like I said, we're three meetings in, and this task list will definitely grow, but we do have a laser focus on definitely activating the downtown map strategy, as you see right here, and doing activation in each of those neighborhoods. Next slide, please. At the same time, we are also going to be creating working groups, small working groups to focus on neighborhood-specific strategies. We have to get a better understanding what the neighborhood's challenges are and their needs, and develop strategies for revitalization and recovery and reopening in our neighborhoods as well. To that end, we are going to compose a group of key external stakeholders to work in these 4 to 5 neighborhoods that we're going to work on in this year, and then next year there'll be additional neighborhoods added. They include members from the Small Business Advisory Council. They will include members from Equity District neighborhoods and BIPOC business owners. There are BIAs and small chambers and business associations in the neighborhoods, and we will include representatives from there as well. And of course, address specific neighborhood and community groups and individuals as we address the strategies to reopen these neighborhood business districts and bring them along as well with Seattle, downtown Seattle. That's it in a nutshell. So I'll end it there, and we'll have time for questions, unless you want to take them now.
All right, Pamela, that's a great, thanks for laying out the basics of the Downtown Revitalization Working Group. You guys have your work cut out for you, but what I like about that is all the aspects of it there. It's not as if we're completely inventing things from scratch. We're just finding ways to give those things that have suffered the most in the past year, or historically in some cases, a boost of energy, infusion of resources, and new focus to kind of, again, seize the opportunity that this crisis has created. Now, the areas you talked about, they separate naturally into, I think, 4 relatively distinct areas. And John Scholes, you want to take it away and describe how those 4 areas fit together and what they mean for the Downtown Revitalization Working Group?
Sure. And just first off, thanks, Felix, for being our moderator again on this spring series. It's great to have you back after moderating our fall virtual event series. And thanks to Amazon and John Shetler for the support of the series and everything they've done over this last year to support their own tenants, kids in our community, and nonprofits. They've really stepped up in a big way. So we're really grateful to have their support for this series. So Pamela covered, the 4 broad goals that the mayor's asked our group to focus on, safety, reinvigoration of arts, culture, retail, ensuring key infrastructure projects in downtown move forward, and bringing workers and patrons back safely. So right now we're working through what are the necessary actions really in the near term here that are going to allow those things to happen. And our group met this week and are starting to formulate really an action plan of what are sort of those most critical items that we need to be focused on as a group, and both working with the public and private sector working together. And they fall into a couple of key categories. We need a focused set of investments and a plan around chronic homelessness downtown to reach those folks that are most in need. This pandemic has exacerbated a problem that we had going into the pandemic in downtown and across our city, but we need to be really focused on those folks that are downtown right now, suffering, that aren't connected to services and emergency housing. We need a safety and security strategy. Great cities, healthy cities, any great downtown, first and foremost, people have got to feel safe and welcome in order to want to come and stay and return. So that is a key action strategy that we think is necessary. we got to get to the basics of beautification and cleaning. We've got graffiti in places we don't want it. We still have some plywood up. If you drive along Interstate 5 right now, it's not the best looking piece of infrastructure, and that's really the front porch in some ways to our downtown. So there's just some basics we got to get right around beautification, get the place in order. Let's deal with the physical appearance of our downtown. We've made some good progress there over the last couple of weeks, particularly in the retail core along Pike and Pine. A lot less plywood, a lot less graffiti, more lights, more flowers, more murals, but we have to take that strategy throughout our downtown. We believe we're going to need a marketing and communications campaign. There's people in our city that haven't been downtown in over a year, and maybe some of the images of downtown are not the ones that we want them to remember. Maybe it's the burning police car that we saw back in May, or some negative headlines. We have to reintroduce people to the great things that are open in downtown, the reasons that they love downtown, the reasons they were coming before. So a dedicated marketing communications campaign to celebrate folks that are reopening, to celebrate those new events and those new things that are coming in our downtown, some of which didn't exist prior to this pandemic. Pamela talked about activations and public events. We think this is a key component to creating new reasons for people to come into downtown. So utilizing our streets, our parks and public areas, supporting artists and musicians and food vendors and retail vendors, creating that energy that you can only get in the heart of your city, and supporting, frankly, a lot of those workers in those sectors and industries that have been so hard hit by this pandemic economically. So a public events and activation strategy, particularly as we get into those beautiful months here in the late spring and summer in Seattle, that's got to be a key part of our efforts here. Transit is key. Employers and employees need to know that the capacity is going to be there, that they have a reliable and frequent trip in and out of downtown. We don't have enough parking spaces to support the jobs that we have in downtown. Transit's so key for many communities where that is their way that they get around, and they're dependent on transit. We have some of the more restrictive public health measures on transit today relative to other parts of the country. So the capacity is very limited, even though we have a lot of service on the street. That was for good reason to keep us all healthy, but we need to have some clarity around what the next several months and into the summer is going to look like when it comes to transit. And then we need to celebrate progress and success along the way, celebrate reopenings, amplify those that are coming back downtown, leverage our social channels, have that communications PR campaign. We've got to continue to build momentum here and highlight those folks that are coming back, those doors that are reopened, those arts and cultural organizations that are putting on productions. We need to tell that story, both locally and I think around the country as well, and help rebuild and rehabilitate to some degree Seattle's brand that has gotten beat up quite a bit over this last year. I think we can do all those things working together, public and private sector. You noted Mike Baker's article in the New York Times last week that really highlighted the success that we've had relative to other metro areas in this region of fighting this pandemic. And if you think about how did we do that, I think there were a couple of key ingredients. We agreed on the shared reality that this is a big major public health threat, and we have to act like it is one. The private sector, the public sector, the community all agreed on that early on. We didn't debate it. We agreed that there's got to be partnership between the private sector and the public sector, that there's things the public health leadership and government has to do. There's things that private employers needed to do. Ordering people to work from home back in early March of 2020 was a big move. We based our actions and decisions on data, and there was lots of transparency on progress. So I think that's the formula for how we get back downtown, how we get our downtown going again, how we renew and restore, not return to normal, but rebuild better, ensure an equitable, more inclusive downtown than the one we left, and ensure that everybody that comes here feels like they belong and feels like they've got opportunity. So we know the recipe because we've had great success in leading the nation in fighting this pandemic. I think we can lead the nation in restoring the energy, vibrancy, vitality to our urban core and beat all those other cities that are trying to do the exact same thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's what Seattle historically has been known for, is that approach, whether it was after the Great Depression or the end of World War II, or even the Boeing bust 50 years ago, or WTO or 9/11, that just not letting the arguments get in the way of figuring out the solutions and moving forward on implementing them. Now, one of the key partners in all this, of course, is the city of Seattle. And Andrew Lewis, the council member Andrew Lewis, I wanted to get your perspective on what you've heard so far about this, and as far as the downtown revitalization effort looks from where you sit.
Perfect segue, Felix. Great moderation. Appreciate it. I'm happy to jump in. So, first off, thanks everyone for inviting me here. And Felix, thanks for moderating. Appreciate seeing Interim Director Banks and John Scholes on the panel. Because, as someone who grew up in Seattle, as you covered in my introduction, it is really painful and difficult to see the state of the downtown core. Downtown Seattle is the hub of culture, commerce, and collaboration in the city of Seattle. It is fundamental to our future success and competitiveness as a city in the metropolitan area. And we need to be doing everything that we can to confront the challenges that not just Seattle is facing, but that downtowns all over the country are facing, and what their future is going to look like in a future defined by, in a lot of cases, non-congregate work or a movement towards more remote working. So I think that we need to really come together through this task force that's been convened and drill down into those different policy areas that Pam and John did a really good overview of, and I look forward to that. I think the biggest thing I can contribute this morning is to really drill down into, frankly, what I think, if we weighted those buckets, would be the biggest single issue that our region is facing. I think bigger than the COVID crisis, which is our crisis of chronic homelessness. And Seattle has one of the biggest problems with chronic homelessness in the country. I don't think anyone would dispute that, that's sitting here today and watching this. All of us, as we go about our business downtown, I walk to work on a regular basis through the downtown core, from Queen Anne to Seattle City Hall, and see on a daily basis. I can sort of, what my predecessor Sally Bagshaw called the C test, right? Like if you can see change, and if you can see the impact on the ground, that is how we assess and know whether we are making progress. And I would just say that among all of the other things that COVID came along and made considerably worse, homelessness ranks very high as one of the things that was in poor shape before the pandemic started, and then absolutely ballooned out of control as a result of the pressures of the pandemic. I was looking at the guest list. I saw Linda Mitchell is here today, and we had a great meeting yesterday about some of the needs that Mary's Place has. Mary's Place that had to de-intensify and lost hundreds of shelter bids at the beginning of the pandemic. That's an experience that isn't unique to Mary's Place. That happened to the Downtown Emergency Service Center. That happened to a lot of the other shelter providers that we have in the city. And it has resulted, not unexpectedly, in a colossal increase in visible homelessness, in camping in vehicles, in camping in tents. That said, I'm optimistic in being able to come together through this process and build out short-term and long-term strategies to address this. And I think that organizing that work, at least partially, through our downtown recovery effort is something that will be very productive, given that we know a large density of people experiencing homelessness are doing so in the downtown core, where a lot of the former shelters that were de-intensified are located, particularly, the Morrison, for those who are familiar with the Downtown Emergency Service Center. And in the short term, as John alluded to in his opening remarks, we really need to scale emergency shelter as if we had been hit by an earthquake or by a mass wildfire or any of the other natural disasters where, when we have a large number of displaced people, you stand up temporary emergency shelter to get people inside, to get them off the street. This is something the City Council has provided a considerable amount of investment in the November budget. We put in funding for 545 additional shelter spaces. We're working with the mayor's office to get those assets stood up. And my understanding is that any day now, this month in March, we are going to start seeing those hotels start to open and get people inside. We're in the process of standing up, as John alluded to, several tiny house villages. My office launched an initiative, It Takes a Village, with the cooperation of a lot of people who are present here today, to scale up the tiny house village system that we have from 294 tiny houses, hopefully to 800 tiny houses by the end of the year. We know that tiny houses are among the most desired shelter options from people experiencing homelessness in Seattle, based on the 5 years of data that we have from that practice. And I look forward to working collaboratively with folks here and in the mayor's office and beyond to build on that progress. I also submitted legislation this week that the council is moving fairly quickly and will pass next Monday to appropriate $12 million additional dollars of spending authority to the mayor's office to stand up even more shelter that will be competitive for FEMA reimbursement. That's shelter that's mostly going to be limited to folks who have comorbidities and are over 65, but it'll be in addition to all of the shelter that I just discussed and will help us close that gap. It's important to keep centered that we have a little over, in the last one night count, 3,700 people who are experiencing chronic homelessness and sleeping outside. So we have a lot of work to do to close that shelter gap and to build up a robust shelter system. But I do just want to add that in the long term, we need a housing first strategy, not a shelter first strategy. And I just wanted to do a quick shout out, like I often do, knowing that there's a lot. I think I saw HS Wright is on today. I want to give a shout out to the Third Door Coalition and the work that Third Door Coalition has been doing in King County to bring people together to build the collaboration needed for a regional strategy on permanent supportive housing. I'm proud of the work that my office has done to pass legislation that cuts the red tape, that cuts redundancies, that cuts development mandates that have inflated the cost of permanent supportive housing. Thanks to that legislation, we're going to save $45,000 per unit of affordable housing or for permanent supportive housing construction, almost 15% of the cost of permanent supportive housing going forward, which is going to be something that makes a really big impact on our ability to scale that up. And I want to thank Third Door Coalition for helping draft those proposals, that alliance of business owners and providers that are making a big difference in our community. So, I'm happy to take questions. I do want to leave people with an optimistic note here, which is, we've seen jurisdictions around the country that have made considerable progress on chronic homelessness. It is not something that is daunting to know what we need to do, but it is daunting in that it'll require diligence, hard work, and intergovernmental collaboration. But it's not a matter at this point of how. I think it's a matter of doing the work and putting the work in to get it done. And I think we're on the precipice of a new era coming out of COVID to confront this, the central challenge that we face once again, considering that took a little bit of a back seat throughout the pandemic, I think, to us tackling first and foremost the pandemic. Now we can refocus our attention on chronic homelessness as we are coming out of it and make progress. Making progress on that issue is going to unlock a lot of the other challenges that we are seeing related to the other pressures on downtown. So with that, I got nothing else to add now, but I'm happy to answer questions and I appreciate being here.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Lewis. And I see some people are already going to the chat box or the question and answer function on Zoom to type in your questions, and please continue to do that. We'll get to those shortly. I do want, and we'll come back to some issues with Councilmember Lewis as well. But I wanted to get back to Pamela Banks. There's one part of the plan that you were talking about and that John touched on a little bit, John Scholes touched on a little bit, and that's this notion of activating the public spaces in downtown Seattle, which ties into everything that we're talking about today in terms of all the issues. Can you tell us a little bit more about those activation plans and what that might look like specifically?
So we are compiling lists right now. We are asking our partners that are at the table. We are also internally looking at what the city can do to help support any type of activation. So one of the ideas that we have coming out of arts and culture is we would like to do shut down some city streets downtown and put some stages up and have a music festival, and then we could support restaurants at the same time. I thought about a mini Bite of Seattle or something like that. I would love to do something around, let's support the Farmers Market Day just locally, because John said there's people that probably haven't been downtown for a whole year. On Saturday, I caught the bus downtown and I spent the day at the market on the waterfront. and just feel that energy and the vibrancy. There are some the tourists here, not on the level and scale we would normally see because it's spring break week, but it's really to get people to come downtown and see, like John said, just from last week to this week about the boards coming down and seeing the cleanliness and getting flowers planted and things like that. We want to be able to activate something in every neighborhood. Pioneer Square, they used to do the art walk or do a passport program where you give people passports, they go visit certain businesses, get stamps, put them in a raffle to win, maybe a night stay down at the Hilton or something like that. So we just really want to get creative around that. Activating that Westlake space. The idea that DSA had to tint it, put heaters in there, TVs in there, get some food, get some drink. That's a great way to activate a very public space and a respite space. Supporting a sidewalk sales or something like that to help the downtown retail core. The really activation is endless. And really get creative, I think, around the vacant office and retail core space, Felix. We'd love to see some, maybe some live workspaces happen or some temporary galleries. There's going to be a really cool gallery exhibit in Pacific Place. We took the mayor on a walking tour. DSA is helping to support this happen it's for International Women's Month. It is focused on the African American. It's an African American artist, but it's focused on healing in the African American community. So it'll be a 6-month-long exhibit, but doing creative and innovative things like that. So they're going to be actually in the Old Victoria's secret space in Pacific Place. So it's doing things like that, temporary galleries, and then it's utilizing city resources to give temporary permits or make it easier to get permits to do things like shut streets off so we can have festivals and different types of activation experiences. I know Uplift Northwest is doing a bunch of cleanup. The city has the Clean Seattle. Am I saying that right, John? The Clean City Initiative. It's the Clean Cities Initiative. And it's not just focused on the downtown core. It is focused on neighborhood business districts as well. We have got to get this graffiti cleaned up, get these boards down, or at least get murals on them. So there's so much that we can do around the activation. And it's really using our creativity and our genuine will to make sure it gets done. And that's the exciting part of it, is that, we have this, internal working structure. And I should stand up to that. The city has 2 interdepartmental teams, or we call them sub-cabinets, that are working on the city side. And one is focused on the economic recovery, and the other part is community resilience. So the external working group will be working with these cities working groups to ensure that these things happen. And the other thing that the Office of Economic Development does is we permit special permits, right? We give out the event permits. And so that the governor now has it's going to take us up to 50% opening. We can now start reviewing special event permits and ensure that we can get some other activities, fun runs, or whatever it may be, back into the downtown core or in the neighborhoods. And so all of those things are, moving forward. And with this beautiful weather we're having, it's just a great time to activate and to bring folks downtown. The other really important piece is our nightlife, is our entertainment, is our music, is our nightclubs, and sporting events. And so those are so crucial. And that's why the opening of Climate Pledge Arena, I forget how many hundreds of thousands of people that are into hockey, but just that arena being open and being able to do concerts there and utilizing our stadiums in that way, and opening Benaroya back up, or Paramount, that kind of nightlife will get the eyes and ears on the street that we want to see, to create a better sense of safety, right, when it's at the night as well. So not only during the day while the office workers are here, but so people can come and patronize our restaurants and dinner theater. I used to love doing that. Go to dinner, go to the Fifth Avenue, go to dinner, go to Benaroya, and bring those kind of activities back.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned safety, because there's a number of people who will always go downtown, or who live there, or who will go there regardless of what they see on the news or what they read in a newspaper. There's people who are committed to coming downtown for events, concerts, sporting events, that sort of thing, shopping. But there's also people who have legitimate concerns about safety, whether it's during the daytime, if they're office workers or business owners, or if they're people coming for this revitalized nightlife that we hope to see bouncing back here. So it's not exactly the elephant in the room, but it is certainly the underlying concern that sort of fits in between all these different elements. How do we address public safety, both on the ground, the actual reality, but also that telling the story and sort of convincing people who might think it's not safe that steps are being taken. Is that something, Councilmember Lewis, is that something you want to address?
Yeah, I can jump in on that first. And I think that it's really, I was talking to John, Scholes about this the other day, saying, I think there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg equation here, right? Because as Pam just said, reactivation of a lot of downtown spaces is going to have a big impact on public safety. But a lot of those reactivations that Pam just talked about are going to be contingent on first building up a system and capacity downtown so that people feel safe enough to go back down there in the first place and activate it. So I think that we really do need to have a proactive public safety plan that is separate from just the activation strategy. And I think there's a couple of different things we need to do. One of the things is a recognition that as we come out of COVID, there will be some things that will just happen naturally that will have an impact on public safety that we should be cognizant of. One of those I think is best illustrated by telling a little bit of a story. Like some people might have seen, I think it was about a month ago now, that the SPD West Precinct had a very successful operation in Pioneer Square, where there were a couple of tents occupied by people who were not homeless, people who were using tents to camouflage a criminal enterprise where they were selling narcotics, running guns, trafficking in human beings. And over a couple of weeks, the police built strong cases. They made 3 arrests, one of them for felony possession of a firearm. The prosecutors requested bail in those cases, and the defendants or the suspects were released. They were charged, given a court date, but they're going to be out on their own recognizances in the pendency of having that trial. And the reason for that is the King County Jail, like everything else in our society, has de-intensified because of COVID. I don't necessarily blame the judges because they have to make decisions about the limited capacity the jail has. And there's trouble even being able to hold people that are committing armed robbery, let alone felony possession of a firearm. So I understand the pressures that they're under. Those pressures around bookings for serious violent felonies is something that will shift as the capacity in the King County Jail opens up again coming out of the pandemic. So some of these things are just linked to the broader reopening plan. Some of these things are more systemic because we know before the pandemic, Seattle had considerable public safety problems in the downtown core that are going to require coordination between the city and the county. And I look forward to reconvening that work. We kind of put that a little bit on hold during the pandemic due to a lot of the challenges, but DSA has been involved in that, and my office continues to be involved in that in terms of looking at some of these issues around chronic retail theft and sort of other stuff that's happening in the downtown core that is inherently criminal conduct. But we also need to keep in mind that a lot of this is related, credibly so, to the perception of the state of the city based on these encampments on every corner. And I'm not blaming the people in the encampments necessarily for committing the crime, but it definitely does create an environment where I feel like there is more low-level criminal activity if people are kind of seeing an environment where there's tents on every corner and it doesn't really seem like there is an expectation of not tagging things with graffiti, right? Or not, shoplifting at the Walgreens. And I think that really leaning in and digging deep into some of those problems of extreme urban poverty that we see on a daily basis is something that's going to help. And one example I want to bring up is the Just Care program, which has been immensely successful. Just Care does deep dives into folks who are living homeless on the street, many of them criminal legal system involved, overwhelmingly people with mental illness and with meth addiction, like over 2/3 of the people on their caseload. Just Care has reached out to 194 folks in Pioneer Square, Chinatown ID, and on the edge of downtown. Only 4 of them have ultimately refused service from the engagement Just Care has done. The county recently announced they're extending the program to June. Myself and many of my colleagues on the city council are very, very committed to leaning into the Just Care model, expanding it, finding out some kind of cost share agreement between the city and the county, because it's having big implications on public safety. And it's not just my opinion, right? I mean, this is based on what I'm hearing from business owners in Pioneer Square, who I talk to on a regular basis. And I've had many business owners in Pioneer Square say, look, for the last several months, the only person that can show up and actually resolve my thing, like what my issue is, has been Just Care. Like I have police showing up and bless their heart, they show up, there's a schizophrenic guy banging on my window, and they basically say, look, can't do anything. We can't book that guy right now, which is true. They can't. We don't really have a shelter we can take him to. No one's going to charge this guy with anything, and they just drive on. But if Just Care shows up, they're like, look, we can talk to the guy, we can de-escalate the guy, we can get him into a hotel with wraparound services, get his needs met. And the business owner says to me, look, that guy is no longer banging on my window. He's no longer banging on my door, and he's getting the help that he needs, and everybody is the better for it. So we need to really lean into Just Care. We need to expand that model. And that's something I'm really committed to. And I know a lot of my colleagues are, as well as our leaders over at King County. So we're going to keep working on that together. And that is going to have very big visible impact if we scale that up in the short term. Some of the other things are going to be related to COVID, and it's going to take a little while, like I said earlier.
Felix,
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis.
I was just going to add, Felix, and just to commend Councilmember Lewis for his leadership on that program. I think he's absolutely right. It's making a difference. I appreciate his focus on scaling it up. It's exactly the approach we need to take to meet people where they are with the services and emergency housing and wraparound support that they need. And no, it is not cheap. And there's been lots of debate over the cost, but the status quo isn't cheap either. And there's so many hidden costs. Not just to the individuals that are suffering, but to the businesses around, to the other systems that have to get involved when we're not meeting people where they are with the services we need. So for downtown, I think to recover, we need to scale efforts like this, like Just Care, that have shown some promise and gotten a lot of people into a better situation than the sidewalk or the alley or the park that they found themselves in.
And John, just to pile on that just really briefly, Felix, I know I'm kind of jumping the moderator here. But just to jump onto that, one of those intangible costs, I would say, John, is just the people's ability to look at their government and think, can we solve a damn problem? And I know that that's not something we can quantify in money, but man, the situation is dire out there, and there's a lot of people that are losing hope. And something that has really restored a lot of people's hope has been the success that Just Care has had, and it's hard to put a price on that. The only way we're going to get through this is if we have confidence in each other and trust to resolve some of these big ongoing chronic problems. And, even if something is expensive, if it is working and if people are feeling, if it's passing that C test, we got to lean into it. So thank you.
We'll get to the questions now. There's several questions that relate to public safety, some that relate to substance abuse. One thing, I mean, just from my perspective, working in the media and thinking about Seattle history, there's got to be the communications, the storytelling balance has to be about how the problems are being addressed, but also the opportunities as well, activating the spaces, the things that we can look forward to, because, the discussions about the problems, I'm not trying to set those aside or short sell those, but balancing the storytelling is so critical because there's only so much oxygen that kind of the half paying attention consumer has to know what's going on in Seattle and whether or not they should make plans to visit down there or go shopping down there. So it's just a really tricky balance, a tricky recipe. But let's look at some of these specific questions. One is about drug use. How do we deal with the drug addiction that is so pervasive here? Drug dealing, shooting up, needles everywhere, petty theft that's challenging to retailers who are trying to stay open. Is there who wants to take on that question?
Yeah, I don't think as a city we've not invested in either mental health or substance use treatment at the levels we know are needed. When you look at the population of folks who are chronically homeless in downtown, the 194 or so folks at the south end of downtown that Councilmember Lewis referenced, a majority of those folks had substance use and mental health challenges. or both at the same time. And we know that from the outreach that was done. And so we haven't invested as a city in those services. We're investing a lot in permanent supportive housing, which we absolutely need to be doing in the wraparound services. But there's a big capacity gap when it comes to substance use. And we had a record number of overdose deaths in Seattle and in King County last year. We are going in the wrong direction there. And we have really a parallel pandemic when it comes to substance use to this coronavirus pandemic that isn't going away with a vaccine. I don't think we're meeting the problem at the scale that's necessary. And it drives a lot of other negative activity in our downtown and in other neighborhoods across Seattle, frankly. So until the treatment is easier to get than the drugs, I think we will continue to have a drug problem. And it doesn't mean the city needs to set up its own treatment program and all of that, but we need to be investing more as a city in the great treatment providers that we have out there and in the county and state system that exists.
I wanted to reference the chronic alcoholism. When I was in the Nickel administration, we opened the 1811 house, and that was a house where people got to go stay and they could drink until they were, blacked out. They looked at the cost of providing supportive housing like that. There were nurses and social workers on staff there, and it did get people clean and sober. It is a national model, Felix. We built one and stopped. I mean, it'd be like up in Canada where they have places where you can safely go and shoot up. I know it sounds kind of bizarre and out the box, but it helps solve a problem there. And so if we could build more supportive housing like the 1811 house, where people could go into permanent housing, I can't remember the millions of dollars that they charted that it saved people from getting into when they used to call them the drunk tanks. And I don't like, but the bus used to come pick people up, take them to Harborview, get them sober, and then they put them back on the street. When we built 1811, I think it was like 40-something units, it dropped. They saved millions of dollars. And that's the kind of housing we have to look at for people that have addictions like alcohol and drugs. I mean, it worked. People came from all over the country to see this house, and we built one and stopped. So here we are, and you said it in your opening, Phyllis, we're this creative, we do all this state-of-the-art things, but then we don't continue it. It's like we do it and we stop. And I know one of our participants talked about people needing help on 3rd Avenue, that people want help. And I think we got to get the Just Cares people up there. She wrote earlier, but those are the kind of things that we need to do. And we can't just, incarcerate people, or we can't just put people, we got to have the treatment facilities and the support that they need when they come out of treatment. That's the key. It was that vision that they had in the Como video where they talked about a center where people can go from one to another to another. It's that kind of service. We can't just give service if we don't do wraparound service. I learned that in the Urban League when we did Career Bridge. We got to spend our money better. We can't just keep throwing it at pockets. We have to do it in a systemic way. And I did want to ask Councilmember Lewis, do you think this coalition for homelessness with hiring a homeless czar is going to help the situation? Because I just recently learned about the coalition that the county and the city is working on. And how do you think that that's going to help address some of these issues that we're bringing up today?
Well, I'm happy to jump in there. Felix, you've been usurped temporarily as
I'm sorry.
I'm happy to.
No, it's a conversation. It's more fun that way. If I'm just sitting back, then I'm doing my job because I've created this safe space for everyone.
No, that's great. So I'm glad that Pam brought that up because actually later this morning we're meeting as a governing board of that the King County Regional Authority on Homelessness to appoint a executive director, or rather to make another offer for actually CEO, I think is the title we're using for that position. People may have seen last month that unfortunately Regina Cannon, who had been made an offer to lead that agency, declined the offer. We believe that we have another finalist from a big list of really exceptional finalists who is willing to take that job on and couldn't be more excited to make that offer later today. And that's really the piece that has had to be put into place before we can start moving forward on that. It's another thing, like the timing of that effort could not have been worse in terms of coinciding with the pandemic. We were all set to go in January of last year to start convening that work. The pandemic slowed everything down. We are 6 months behind in the work plan for that regional authority. But I would say, despite all that, it is going forward. We will pick an executive director. It will give new cohesion and coordination to the resources the county and city can bring together. So instead of, two sometimes divergent, sometimes overlapping agencies will come together and have one contracting authority to make sure that we are eliminating redundancies and to make sure that we have a cohesive regional policy so that we can talk about the King County approach to homelessness instead of 39 different constituent approaches to homelessness spread across all the cities of King County. That work is going to start getting going with more substance once that CEO is in place, because until we have the CEO, right? I mean, Pam knows. Pam was executive director of an important local organization in the Urban League. Like, you need that central person to inspire the vision of the organization, to assemble a team. And we couldn't really put together a plan and then impose it on some executive director. They got to have a shape in building their own plan and putting it together.
I do want to jump in there just because we are running very short on time. There's a couple comments and one question. One person challenges the time required for the recovery and thinks Seattle will snap back faster than most people expect. I think that's good. One person comments about it's not an issue of COVID, it's an issue of leadership by the mayor and the city council failing to protect its citizens. And the question that follows is, what about the lack of police presence downtown? Seattle's police problems are paramount and are not being dealt with effectively by the city council. We have about 90 seconds to answer that, and I'd love to hear people's perspectives on that.
Well, I'll just jump in really quickly. I would say, the city council has authorized funding to hire 114 additional officers. We're also seeing constraints, like I said earlier, where all the officers in the world, given some of the constraints of COVID, aren't dealing with some of the issues we're facing because they don't have the ability to do bookings. We have officers that are showing up when they can respond in downtown and District 7 and just saying, look, can't do anything because we can't arrest for shoplifting right now.
So what's the solution? I'm sorry to cut you short. We're really running close. What is the solution? Give me the solution in 10 seconds.
Right. Just Care is resulting in removing low-level offenders off the street that we can't get bookings for, and we need to lean into Just Care more. And that is really what has been making the visible difference.
John Scholes?
Presence is a huge issue, huge gap. The private sector, unfortunately, is having to fill that gap with spending money out of their own pocket for emphasis patrols. But people need to feel that downtown's a safe and secure place. And we need to be able to distinguish between those that are hurting and need help and support and services, and those that are just downtown to hurt others or destroy property. And for those folks, they need to face consequences and accountability.
All right. I want to thank our audience for taking part and for all the great questions. We couldn't get to all of them, but I think we covered the gist of most of them. I want to thank our panelists, Pamela Banks from the City of Seattle, Councilmember Andrew Lewis, President of DSA John Scholes, and John Shuttler from Amazon, and Amazon for supporting the series. Please join us again on April 22nd, the next installment of DSA Virtual Access. We'll look at the continuing recovery efforts. It's a work in progress, and we're all a part of it. More details in your inbox soon. I'm Felix Bunnell for the Downtown Seattle Association. Thank you very much.
Thank you.